is that history component is in that intellectual tenet. So I definitely would to like just kind of love your perspective, because whenever she would talk about intellectualism, she would always get into the history of the math, the history of the science, the history of the social studies, the history of the English, making sure that kids understand, where did this come from? Who created this? Why did they create this? What was the intention behind this? And what do we have now? What changed over time? So just kind of like hearing that, what are some of your thoughts on like, why is history so important with teaching culturally responsive teaching as best as you can?
When I think back as my experience as an educator, I remember it wasn't until I became an administrator that I realized that curriculum design was not an expectation for all teachers. And that blew my mind, because I never understood how somebody could take somebody else's curriculum that was not written for these students in my class that I'm teaching, whether that was on the South Side of Chicago, East Side Detroit, West Side Detroit, or even the youngest that I'm working with out here in the Bay. How can you take somebody else's curriculum and not curate it? How could you be an educator and not be curious about, where did this come from? And so, yes, it's a lot of work as an educator, but like curriculum design and education are synonymous in my book. Yes. And so when I'm thinking about like, when I was creating my little curriculums, and I look back actually recently at like my first year curriculum that I taught, or that I delivered, and it would definitely look like a first year. Like it was the draft of a draft of a draft that would ultimately become something successful.
Right.
But the root of it was really the history of this. I never presented any material to students that I couldn't answer the 5 whys for. Like, why is this important? Why is it important? Why is it important? Like, if I couldn't get 5 whys, how am I going to give that to the youngins? And what I'm doing is, with those whys, really diving into the history of this. And the point that I would get stuck at is the point that I knew that that's obviously where I had to keep digging, but that's really where the gold was.